The moonlight shimmered over the battered ramparts of King's Landing, revealing a once proud city still reeling from recent wars. Streets that had once bustled with merchants and nobles alike now lay quiet, haunted by memories of chaos. In the hush of this uneasy peace, the heart of the Red Keep thrummed with something new, an awakening sense of possibility, whispers of a future reshaped. Gendry Baratheon had never dreamed of sitting upon the Iron Throne. He was a blacksmith's apprentice, a bastard born in the slums, and all the storms of fate that had tossed him about Westeros had not entirely erased his disbelief that he might ever rise to prominence. Yet here he stood in the secret hours before dawn, staring across the city from the highest tower. The wind was cold upon his face, but his blood felt aflame with a determined purpose. Bare-chested except for a loose tunic and breeches, Gendry looked less a king and more a man who had spent years hammering steel in the forges of Flea Bottom. The sweat and grime from those days still clung to his memory, forging something unbreakable in him. The weight of House Baratheon's legacy now fell upon his shoulders, an inheritance he had not sought, but which had found him all the same. He thought of the boy he'd been, running messages through the serpentine streets, forging small metal trinkets in Tobo Mott's shop, trying to do good work for a few coppers. He remembered hunger, cold, the sting of hopelessness. But in those days, even hopelessness had its own flavor, one he could swallow and endure. Even then, he'd felt a sense of belonging among the grime and soot, as though the scorching heat of the forge was forging something stronger than steel inside his spirit. The darkness before him whispered of all that was lost and all that might be found. Across the roof, perched with a silent cat-like grace, Arya Stark watched him. She was invisible to most if she wished to be, a wraith in the night. But Gendry knew she was there by the faint brush of her presence, by the shift in the wind, by some intangible connection that had grown between them over their shared years of hardship. He turned, meeting her eyes. Her face was shadowed, her posture at ease and yet coiled with tension, a panther ready to spring. She had the Stark look in her, sharp-boned and determined, but there was also a feral edge to her that belonged to no house. Arya had survived countless battles of her own, far from him, and the steel in her gaze reflected the roads she had walked, the shapes she had worn, the faces she had become. Yet here she was again, by his side, in the deep of the night. They had come together like flint and tinder, forging sparks of something old and unspoken. It was a bond that reached across time, a memory of nights spent in companionship, of a silent promise forged on the open road, of a moment in a war-torn keep when each recognized the other for who they truly were. Survivors, battered by the cruelties of the world, yet unbroken. Arya stepped forward, her leather boots hardly making a sound on the stone. She tilted her head up at Gendry. "You look like you're staring down a storm," she said, voice low and calm, laced with a hint of affection. Gendry allowed a small smile. "Maybe I am," he replied, "but the storm's in me too." She reached for his hand, the same hand that once held a blacksmith's hammer, the same hand that had taken hers years ago in that war-torn time. Her fingers were calloused, strong from swordsmanship and survival. She said nothing more, just stood close enough that he could feel the warmth of her presence. The city spread beneath them like a great beast, slumbering but not tamed. All around, the hush settled over the capital. Ravens perched on the battlements, awaiting the dawn. The Red Keep, that fortress of secrets, had seen more than its share of kings and queens. Some wise, many cruel. Gendry wondered what the city might look like if a new dynasty rose, if the ghost of Robert Baratheon's laughter merged with the fierce honor of the Starks. He wondered if peace could ever be shaped in these streets, or if the memory of war would always linger like a wound that refused to heal. He felt Arya's hand tighten on his. "You don't have to do this if you don't want to," she said softly. "We can leave it to others, vanish into the night. You owe the realm nothing." But Gendry shook his head. "I owe it to those who can't defend themselves," he murmured. "I've lived among them. Flea-bottom folk, orphans of war, those who can't fight for their bread. I know what it is to have no power at all. If I can do something good with this legacy, if I can stop the wheel from crushing more lives, then I should. Or at least try." A faint smile played across Arya's lips. "I thought that might be your answer. I only wish we had arrived at this moment without so much blood spilled." The memory of all they'd endured flickered between them. Ned Stark's execution, the War of the Five Kings, the nightmares at Harrenhal, the assassinations, the betrayals, the dragons, and the dead. So many had paid the highest cost. Gendry wondered how much more would be required for a single seat of power. Was the Iron Throne worth it? Or was this all madness repeated through centuries? He had wrestled with these questions, searching for a reason to claim a seat that had brought nothing but misery to so many. But the people needed a leader, someone with the strength to protect them. And if the blood of House Baratheon ran in his veins, if it offered him the right by birth, he would try to hold that seat with honor. Still, he knew it would not be easy nor safe. Power was a magnet for intrigue, for cunning men and women who sought to twist it to their advantage. He looked at Arya then, her gray eyes unwavering. They both knew that claiming the throne would mean stepping into a nest of vipers. But they also knew that the realm needed something different, someone tempered by hardship, guided by a moral compass that pointed toward the small folk, not just the highborn lords. Arya reached up and brushed a strand of his hair aside. Then do it. And do it well, Gendry Baratheon. I'll be at your side. He exhaled, the tension leaving his shoulders. In all his life, he had never been so certain and yet so terrified at once. This was uncharted territory and the price of failure was high. But Arya's presence bolstered him. The knowledge that House Stark stood with him, embodied in this fierce, unyielding woman, gave him strength. He did not feel alone in this fight. It was not a claim of arrogance, it was a sense of duty lit by an honest desire to help. Under the fading stars, they descended from the tower. The corridors of the Red Keep still held the ghosts of those who had prowled here before. Gendry could sense the burden of centuries pressing against the stones. Yet there was something new in these halls, a flicker of hope, or so he allowed himself to believe. Dawn broke over the city, painting the sky with an orange glow. It was the hour of truth. If Gendry was going to claim the throne, it would be now, before the lords and ladies gathered in the throne room, before the common folk who waited outside, wondering what the new day would bring. Gendry was no orator, but he knew how to speak plainly. He had faith that his honest words, hammered like steel from the truth in his heart, might resonate where flowery speeches fell short. He moved with Arya through the winding corridors, accompanied by a small retinue of trusted knights and allies. Ser Davos Seaworth was among them. The Onion Knight had pledged his loyalty, drawn to Gendry by the memory of serving under Stannis Baratheon, but also by the promise of something more just. Davos was no stranger to unorthodox kings, nor to the weight of moral responsibility. His craggy face bore the lines of countless battles, and as he walked, he gave Gendry a reassuring nod. Also present were a handful of northern lords sent by Sansa Stark. They didn't say much, but they watched Gendry and Arya with guarded respect. The tension in the air was electric, as though the realm itself held its breath. Gendry could imagine the swirl of rumors that preceded him, the bastard of Robert Baratheon, the new Lord of Storm's End, who would claim King's Landing with a vow to protect the realm from further ruin. Some believed in him, others called him a pretender. Some questioned whether the crown should pass to House Targaryen remnants or to some unclaimed Lannister offshoot. Still others believed that any monarchy at all was doomed to fail. But Gendry pressed on. The future was a blank page waiting to be filled. They entered the Great Hall. The high vaulted ceiling loomed overhead, a reminder of the thousands who had stood here before. The Iron Throne dominated the end of the hall, a brutal seat forged from the swords of conquered enemies. In the early morning light, it looked both majestic and sinister, its spikes and edges catching the sun in jagged reflections. A hush fell. Lords and ladies parted to make a path for Gendry. He could see cautious faces, calculating stares, flickers of hope. He saw men who had fought in wars both honorable and not. He saw young heirs whose families had been all but wiped out. He saw the scars left by the last tumultuous decades of bloodshed. He approached the dais, his heart pounding. The Iron Throne loomed just steps away, a seat that had claimed the lives of many who dared sit upon it. He paused, remembering the stories: Aegon the Conqueror, Maegor the Cruel, Aerys the Mad King, Robert Baratheon, Joffrey, Tommen, Cersei, and more. Each had shaped the realm in different ways, for better or worse. Now it was Gendry's turn if he chose to accept the mantle. He turned to face the gathering, inhaling the vast hush of the hall. Then he spoke, voice resonating with the untrained directness of a man who had never learned to mince words. "My lords, my ladies," he said, "you know my name. You know I am Gendry Baratheon, acknowledged son of Robert Baratheon, raised to Lord of Storm's End by Queen Daenerys Targaryen, who has since passed from this world. I have not come here to speak of claims alone, but of duty." His words were simple, lacking the flourishes of a trained courtier. Yet the hall seemed to lean in. Even those who doubted him could sense the earnestness in his voice. Arya watched from just behind him, her presence a silent bolster. Gendry continued, "Many of you have fought and bled for this realm. We have lost fathers, mothers, children, friends. We have lost entire houses and cities to war, madness, and dragons. I cannot promise to undo that hurt, nor can I promise a perfect reign. But I can promise this: I will do everything in my power to protect the realm's people and bring a just peace." A stir passed through the onlookers. Some seemed moved, others remained stoic. Gendry went on, "My father, King Robert, was loved by some and hated by others. He was a man of war more than rule, and I was never meant for any of this. I grew up in a forge among the small folk. I know their struggles because they were mine. The men and women who serve in your halls, who toil in your fields, who stand on the walls in the cold of winter, they need a king who remembers them. Not just in words, but in heart and in action." He could see men like Davos nodding subtly. He saw others, older lords, exchange skeptical glances. Nonetheless, Gendry pressed forward. He had no illusions about winning them all at once. "I do not claim the throne to hoard power. If the council deems another more fit, I will step aside. But if you will have me, I will sit upon this throne and strive to end the cycle of violence that has racked our realm. That is my vow before gods and men." Silence gripped the hall for a moment. It felt like the entire realm was suspended in the hush. Then quietly, Ser Davos stepped forward, his gravelly voice echoing. "I have seen Gendry Baratheon's heart. I stood beside Stannis Baratheon, who was as duty-bound a man as I've known, and I saw what pride can do to an honest man. Gendry is different. He knows the cost of pride. I say we give him a chance." A murmur of agreement came from some corners, while others whispered in guarded tones. Then an aged lord from the Westerlands stepped forward, leaning on a cane. "I lost 2 sons and a grandson in these wars," he croaked. "If you would keep the peace, I will bend the knee." One by one, others spoke their piece, some pledging fealty, some withholding, some voicing concerns. Gendry listened, answering as best he could. He was unpolished, but there was sincerity in his every word. Eventually, a kind of quiet acceptance settled among many of the lords and ladies. Not all, but enough. The seeds of a new monarchy were sown in that dawn-lit hall. Gendry's gaze flicked to Arya, standing just behind him as the High Septon approached with a crown that had belonged to Robert Baratheon, reclaimed from the storerooms. The circlet of gold and stag antlers was heavy with memory. Gendry bowed his head, feeling a swirl of conflicting emotions: fear, hope, resolve. The High Septon recited ancient words, naming him Gendry of the House Baratheon, first of his name, King of the Undulls, the Rhoynar, and the First Men. King of the 7 Kingdoms, protector of the realm. The crown settled on his brow, and a ripple went through the hall as the courtiers bowed. For a moment, Gendry's heart pounded so loudly he thought it would burst from his chest. He was no longer a bastard. He was no longer a mere blacksmith. He was king, a role that could devour him or transform him, depending on his choices. The coronation ended with an oath: "I swear before the old gods and the new to protect the realm, to uphold justice, and to serve the common good, so long as I shall reign." When it was done, Gendry turned to Arya. She had not knelt with the others. She merely stood there, arms crossed, a faint smile on her lips, as though she refused to bow to any mortal. But her gaze shone with a fierce pride. And then he did something that startled the entire court. He reached out, took her hand, and raised it. "This is Arya of House Stark," he said, voice unwavering. "She is my companion, my equal in all things. Will you have her as your queen?" The question rang out, and a hush followed, more intense than before. Many in the hall were caught off guard. They had expected Gendry to take a more traditional route, perhaps to wed a noble lady whose marriage would strengthen alliances. But Gendry had not found love in alliances. He had found it in the woman who had saved him from captivity, who had traveled with him through hidden roads, who had dared to challenge the entire world for the sake of her family. For him, Arya was more than a match. She was a force of nature, a north wind that could cut and heal in equal measure. A slow rumble of murmurs spread. House Stark was beloved in the north, and Arya had her own legendary aura after her feats in the wars. The realm knew her as the girl who had survived the worst, a ghost who had dealt death to those who deserved it. Yet she was also unorthodox, unpredictable. Some found her terrifying, others revered her. But the loyalty the North commanded could not be denied. And Gendry's sincerity was clear. Before any formal response could be given, Arya spoke for herself. "I'm not one for courts or crowns," she said, voice carrying through the silence. "But I stand with Gendry because I believe in what he wants for this realm. If my presence can help bring peace, I'll endure whatever ceremonies you people want." She paused, then added softer. But if you expect me to sit quietly and embroider, you've chosen the wrong queen." A ripple of laughter, uneasy yet genuine, moved through the crowd. The tension lessened. Gendry felt a wave of relief. The lords and ladies were seeing them as they truly were. No illusions, no pretty masks. At length, the hall gave its assent, though pockets of skepticism remained. The union of Baratheon and Stark was sealed with the hush of a vow. Gendry felt Arya's hand squeeze his, and he knew in that moment that, no matter the trials ahead, he would face them with her by his side. So began the reign of King Gendry Baratheon, the bastard of Robert and Arya Stark, the Wolf Queen, a pair forged by hardship, tempered by love. The realm was wary, but also weary of war. A new day had dawned, and with it came the faintest glimmer of hope. Their first days as king and queen were a swirl of meetings and negotiations. Gendry quickly realized the labyrinthine complexities that lay beneath every decision. Men who had once been enemies now sat at the same table, forced to find common ground or risk plunging the land into chaos again. Gendry's inexperience was a double-edged sword. He was an outsider to many courtly intrigues, which made him both dangerous to those who thrived on manipulation and vulnerable to those who might exploit him. But he had allies. Ser Davos served as hand of the king, guiding him with steady counsel. The older man understood the pitfalls of power, having witnessed the tragedies of Stannis' reign. He reminded Gendry to balance justice with mercy, to weigh the realm's needs over any personal vendettas. Gendry tried to heed that advice, though the weight of the crown grew heavier by the day. Arya found herself in a unique position. Though she held the title of queen, she refused to be bound by the customs that sought to confine her to needlework and polite smiles. Instead, she made it her mission to root out corruption and threats within the city. Stepping into the shadows, she gathered intelligence from back alleys and hidden corners. The many-faced assassin within her had not disappeared, she had merely found a new cause. With quiet efficiency, she helped Gendry navigate dangers that would have blindsided him otherwise. Rumors spread of a cloaked figure prowling the rooftops of King's Landing at night. Unseen except for fleeting glimpses, she was said to appear in the darkest corners where conspirators plotted. Many swore that this figure was the Wolf Queen herself, but none could prove it. If Arya heard these rumors, she paid them no heed, content to let fear and uncertainty keep potential traitors uneasy. Meanwhile, Gendry sought to mend the rifts across the Seven Kingdoms. The North, under Sansa Stark's rule in Winterfell, remained largely loyal, but they expected Gendry to respect their autonomy. The Vale was more cautious, still nursing old wounds from alliances gone sour. The Riverlands were a patchwork of loyalties, while the Reach had been devastated by the wars and the destruction wrought by dragons. The Westerlands were cautious too, wary of a Baratheon king after the downfall of the Lannisters. Dorne remained proud and aloof, still nurturing old grudges against House Baratheon for the deaths of Elia Martell's children during Robert's rebellion. To heal these divisions, Gendry traveled. He embarked on a royal progress across the realm, determined to see the lands and the people for himself. Everywhere he went, he brought a smaller retinue than most kings would, choosing to sleep in modest chambers or tents when necessary. This alarmed many of his advisors, who feared for his safety. But Gendry insisted. "A king who cannot face his people is no king at all," he said. "Let them see me and let me see them." Arya accompanied him part of the way, though she often vanished on her own errands. She was drawn back to Winterfell at times, where her siblings and memories awaited. But always, she returned to Gendry's side, flitting in like a ghost, reminding him that he was not alone in this massive undertaking. Their journey took them first to the Stormlands, Gendry's ancestral seat. The storms there raged as fiercely as ever, battering the coastline, but the people greeted him with cautious optimism. Many remembered Robert with fondness, others with bitterness. Gendry walked among them, visited smithies, listened to complaints about taxes and bandit raids. He made a point of forging a sword in one of the local forges, a symbolic act meant to show he still understood what it was to work steel. The locals responded with a measure of respect, seeing in him a man who had not forgotten his roots. From the Stormlands, they traveled north to the Crownlands, ensuring King's Landing remained stable in their absence. Tensions simmered in the countryside, where small folk were still recovering from the scorched fields of war. Gendry commanded that bread and seed be distributed, that war-torn fields be replanted, that the crown offer aid to rebuild. Some called him naive for spending treasury gold on the small folks' welfare rather than hoarding it. But Gendry persisted, believing that a realm could only stand strong if its foundation, the common people, were not left to starve. Tales of the new king's generosity spread, alongside rumors of the Wolf Queen's silent efficiency in exposing threats. The people began to talk of them as a pair of unlikely saviors, one forging hope with a blacksmith's hands, the other stalking in the shadows to prevent betrayal. It was a delicate balance, and many doubted it would last. But for a time, the realm knew a fragile peace. Their progress continued. In the Reach, Gendry stood among fields still bearing the scars of Dragonfire. He met with local lords who had pledged fealty to House Targaryen, then to House Baratheon. He promised them that he would help restore the breadbasket of the realm if they pledged to keep the peace. War had turned these lush lands into smoldering ruins once before. Gendry refused to let it happen again. Some doubted him, others accepted. The slow work of reconciliation began. Arya found the Reach too quiet for her liking, so she wandered. Occasionally, she brought word of local bandit lords or discovered a conspiracy among minor lords who resented Gendry's rule. She dealt with them quietly, ensuring the realm would not be destabilized by rebellion. Gendry could see how this took a toll on her. Arya thrived on freedom, on the open road, on constant movement. Yet she stayed because she believed in what they were building. When they journeyed to the Westerlands, the tension rose. Many Lannister loyalists remained, uncertain whether to trust a Baratheon king after the downfall of Cersei and the deaths of her children. Gendry arrived with humility, acknowledging the shared history and tragedy. He spoke to the lords of gold-mining towns, hearing their grievances and promising fair trade policies. Arya, meanwhile, uncovered a plot by a group of disaffected knights who sought to place a distant Lannister cousin on the throne. She quelled the plot swiftly, leaving just enough evidence behind for Gendry to confront the would-be usurpers publicly. In doing so, they both reinforced that while they sought peace, they would not tolerate betrayal. Over time, Gendry's sincerity and Arya's vigilance carved out a careful respect among the lords of the Westerlands. They saw that this king did not arrive in triumph to mock them, nor did he thirst for vengeance. He simply wanted them to be part of the realm, to prosper under a just crown. Some came to support him wholeheartedly. Others maintained their distance, yet agreed to uphold the king's law. It was not a perfect union, but it was a start. In the Riverlands, Gendry paid respects at the Trident, standing at the spot where Robert Baratheon had once felled Rhaegar Targaryen. The echoes of that battle still haunted the waters. Gendry could almost hear the clash of steel, the thunder of war horses. The realm was steeped in old blood, old grudges. He knelt by the water's edge, letting the memory of the wars wash over him. He wondered if there would ever be an end to the cycle. Arya, standing behind him, placed a hand on his shoulder. "We can't right every wrong," she said softly, "but we can keep making choices that don't lead to more of this." She gestured to the river, which had run red that day so many years ago. Gendry nodded, resolved anew. The Riverlands had been ravaged by war more than most. He called a council of the local lords, urging them to set aside old animosities, to unite in rebuilding. He vowed royal funds to restore farmland and protect trade routes. Slowly, war-worn knights and farmers found hope in his words. They had seen too many kings come and go, each leaving the land in ruin. This time, there was at least a chance for something different. Throughout these travels, Gendry's connection with Arya deepened. They had been bonded by adversity before, but now they shared the enormous responsibility of leadership. Yet they remained true to themselves. Gendry was no polished king, but a man who spoke plainly and worked tirelessly. Arya was no demure consort, but a fierce warrior of the shadows, taking on tasks no one else could. Their love was forged in the mutual understanding that neither sought to change the other. Time passed, and the realm inched toward stability. The scars of war did not vanish, but they slowly began to heal. King's Landing saw improvements in the distribution of food and the restoration of damaged districts. The crown's finances were carefully managed by a small council that sought efficiency over grandeur. The old ways of lavish spending and corruption faced new checks. With Arya's help, Gendry rooted out corrupt officials who tried to skim from the treasury, sending a clear message that the old vices would not be tolerated. But no reign is free of challenges. The first major test came in the form of a sudden uprising in Dorne. A fiery young noble, distantly related to the Martells, declared that the Dornish should never again be ruled by an outsider. He raised a small army, calling on historical grievances and promising independence. Word reached Gendry that the rebels were mustering near Sunspear, gathering support from restless lords who had not forgiven House Baratheon for the death of Princess Arya Martell and her children decades ago. The Raven arrived late one evening. Gendry stood at a long table with Arya, Ser Davos, and a few trusted advisors, reading the message in the flickering candlelight. His heart sank. War threatened to tear the realm apart yet again. And yet, he could not simply ignore Dorne's concerns. Their claim was rooted in genuine pain. He decided to travel south with a small contingent to speak directly with the leaders of the rebellion. Many argued against it, calling it a suicide mission, but Gendry insisted on negotiation before any blood was spilled. Arya insisted on coming along. "I won't let you walk into their spears alone," she said, a quiet steel in her voice. They set out at once, crossing the desert roads. The heat was merciless, a far cry from the cold wind of the north or the damp chill of King's Landing. Sandstorms occasionally swept across the horizon, and scorpions prowled the dunes at night. Gendry's entourage was small, only Ser Davos, a handful of trusted knights, and Arya, who rode with a calm focus, scanning the horizon for threats. When they reached Sunspear, they found the gates barred. The rebel leader, who styled himself as Prince Corran of Dorne, waited within. Gendry sent a messenger requesting parley. After a tense delay, word returned that Corran would grant them entry under a banner of truce, though no guarantee was made for their safety. Gendry took a steadying breath and entered the city, mindful that one wrong move could end his life, and with it, the fragile peace of the Seven Kingdoms. Inside the great hall of Sunspear, the tension was as hot as the Dornish sun. Corran stood at the head of a gathered group of soldiers and nobles, his eyes burning with fervor. He was a tall man with sun-creased skin, his garb a riot of deep reds and oranges. When Gendry and Arya arrived, the crowd hissed and muttered. But Corran raised a hand, signaling silence. "King Gendry Baratheon," Corran said, his voice echoing. "Welcome to Dorne. You must have known this could be a trap." Gendry inclined his head. "I did. But I also know enough of the Dornish to believe you would not kill an unarmed envoy who comes to speak of peace." A murmur went through the crowd. Corran's lips curled in a half-smile. "Peace. A word we hear from many who come to rule over us. Yet we remain the last to bend, the last to be conquered. Why should we yield to you?" "I don't ask you to yield," Gendry said. "I ask you to join a realm that is trying to heal, a realm where each region can retain its customs and dignity. I come to hear your grievances. If you desire more autonomy, let us speak of it." Corran studied Gendry, then Arya, who stood at his side, her eyes cold and watchful. Arya Martell and her children were butchered under the Baratheon banner during Robert's rebellion, Corran said. "Dorne will never forget." Gendry nodded. "I do not ask you to forget or forgive. I can only say that I was not the one who committed those crimes. I acknowledge the pain caused. If it is possible to make amends, name them, and I will do what is within my power." The hall fell silent. Many stared at Gendry in surprise. They had expected arrogance, threats, or dismissals. Instead, they found humility. Arya stepped forward, addressing Corran. "House Stark has allied with House Baratheon, and you know our family has no love for needless bloodshed. We understand revenge, but it rarely ends well. Don't punish the realm for the sins of men long dead." Corran's gaze flickered. "You speak boldly, Wolf Queen. But the memory of Alya's death and her children's murder is not something we can wash away with a few words. Still, your willingness to speak is new." He turned and gestured for wine to be brought. Slowly, a precarious dialogue began. For hours, they spoke of old wounds and new possibilities. Gendry offered increased autonomy for Dorne, a say in the royal council, and fair trade deals. Corran demanded restitution for Dornish families who had suffered under previous regimes. Gendry agreed to set aside funds from the royal treasury to assist Dorne's rebuilding, especially in areas devastated by the wars. Not all were convinced, but some lords in Corran's following began to soften. They saw in Gendry an earnestness that reminded them of none of the old kings. Corran himself seemed torn between hatred for the Baratheon name and recognition of this new king's sincerity. In the end, they brokered an uneasy truce. Corran would stand down, and in return, Dorne would receive concessions that recognized its unique standing in the realm. Both sides were wary, but a fragile peace was maintained. Leaving Sunspear, Gendry felt the heavy burden of relief. They had narrowly avoided a civil war. Arya rode beside him, silent for a time. Then she said that was risky, going in unarmed. Gendry shrugged. "I'd rather risk myself than risk the realm. I've seen too many die in wars that could have been prevented. She nodded, her expression unreadable. But he could sense her respect. In that moment, Gendry realized how essential her support was. She was not just a queen in name, but a partner in this monumental task of ruling with fairness. Upon returning to King's Landing, they found new challenges awaiting them: harvest issues in the Reach, a resurgence of raiders in the north, piracy on the Narrow Sea. But step by step, Gendry addressed each issue, supported by a growing network of loyalists who believed in him. Arya continued her quiet campaigns against those who would sow chaos. With the help of advisors like Ser Davos, they navigated the treacherous waters of governance. Over time, the small folk began to speak more freely of their new king and queen. They told tales of how King Gendry once worked a forge, how he had a strong arm and a stronger heart, how he cared for the poor. They whispered of the Wolf Queen who walked unseen, ensuring justice in the dark corners of the realm. Slowly, hope took root. In the Red Keep, the old labyrinth of corridors no longer felt so menacing. Arya patrolled them by night, ensuring no conspirator nestled in the shadows. Gendry met daily with the small council, forging policies that aimed to rebuild rather than conquer. The Iron Throne stood as a stark reminder of the realm's violent history, but Gendry refused to become a prisoner of that legacy. He sought counsel, listened to the people, and ruled as best he could. Still, the realm was not a fairy tale. Threats lurked in every corner, from foreign princes to discontented lords who saw opportunity in toppling a king of humble origins. Gendry knew that every decision could lead to betrayal. Yet he pressed on, driven by a sense of duty that had been shaped in the fires of Flea Bottom. One evening, as the sun set red over Blackwater Bay, Gendry found Arya on the battlements, gazing out toward the sea. He joined her, resting his hands on the stone. They watched the last rays of light dance on the water, the silhouettes of ships drifting lazily in the harbor. He glanced at Arya, recalling the first time they had met, two youths fleeing the chaos of war. They had changed so much since then. Arya was a queen now, but still the same fierce soul he had known. He marveled at the bond that had guided them through so many perils. "Sometimes I wonder if we can ever truly keep the peace," Gendry said softly. "History weighs on us like an anchor." Arya tilted her head. "We can only do what we can, one day at a time. We've changed things already. Maybe not enough, maybe not perfectly. But look around, you've kept the realm from another war. That's something." He nodded, a small smile finding its way to his lips. "I couldn't have done it without you." She turned to him, her eyes flickering with an emotion that was part amusement, part tenderness. "Yes, you could have. It just would have been more dangerous." He gave a low chuckle. "Fair enough. But I'd rather do it with you." A comfortable silence settled between them. There, atop the walls of the Red Keep, they were not just king and queen, but two souls who had fought and bled for this chance at shaping a better world. They knew that the future remained uncertain, but they faced it with unyielding resolve. In the months that followed, the realm saw incremental improvements. Trade routes stabilized, fields were replanted, and the small folk began to trust that the new crown was not simply another tyrant in waiting. Yet Gendry remained vigilant, aware that peace was fragile. He worked ceaselessly, forging alliances, drafting laws that curbed the power of corrupt lords, and ensuring that no region was left to fend for itself. The lords, too, began to see that Gendry's brand of rule was not naive but grounded in a personal experience of hardship. Some found it inspiring, others found it vexing, but most grudgingly acknowledged its effectiveness. Arya's role evolved as well. She became a kind of living legend, unseen and feared by those who wished to subvert the peace. Rumors spread that she could wear any face, that she was as silent as death, that she carried a blade named Needle which had drunk the blood of the Night King himself. Exaggerations blended with truth, and soon, criminals and conspirators whispered her name like a curse. She embraced that reputation, using fear to keep the unscrupulous at bay. Yet to the innocent, she was known as a protector, one who showed no mercy to those who preyed on the weak. Their union was unlike any other royal marriage. They did not host opulent feasts or lavish tournaments. Instead, they visited orphanages and farmland, blacksmith shops, and fishing villages. They asked people what they needed, listened to their stories, shared in their struggles. This was not mere performance, they truly cared. Over time, the realm began to care for them in return. Of course, there were those who still plotted against them, minor lords who yearned for power, merchants who missed the days of corruption, foreign rulers who wanted to exploit turmoil. But one by one, those threats were discovered and neutralized, either through diplomatic means or, when necessary, decisive action. It was an endless vigil, and sometimes Gendry questioned whether the realm could truly be saved from itself. Yet each day, the sun rose on a realm that was slowly coming back to life. The monarchy under Gendry and Arya was not perfect nor free of conflict, but it strove toward justice and unity. The people felt the difference in their daily lives. Flea Bottom was not magically transformed into a paradise, but at least it was cleaner, safer. Bread was more available, crime less rampant. In the countryside, farmers could tend their crops without constant fear of pillaging armies. It was, by all accounts, a fragile but real improvement. Time went on. Gendry grew more confident in his kingship, though he never lost the humility that defined him. Arya slipped between roles as easily as she had once slipped between faces, sometimes seen at court, offering counsel or a sharp retort, other times vanishing for weeks on secret missions. But always she returned. Their love was a quiet, persistent thing built on shared trials and mutual respect. They did not flaunt it in grand gestures, but in small moments of understanding, a grin exchanged across a council chamber, a hand held in the privacy of a dawn-lit corridor, a hushed conversation on a turret under the stars. In a land where so many marriages had been forged out of duty or ambition, there stood out as something genuine. Occasionally, Arya traveled back to Winterfell to see her siblings and walk beneath the weirwood tree in the Godswood. Gendry joined her when he could, forging ties with the North and strengthening alliances. He found that the Northerners, though fiercely independent, respected him for his honest approach. Sansa, ruling as Lady of Winterfell, welcomed their visits. Though her composure was ever regal, Gendry sensed she was relieved to see Arya content. On one such visit, Sansa took Gendry aside. They walked the walls of Winterfell, the snow drifting gently around them. "You've surprised many," she said, a faint smile on her lips. "My father used to speak of Robert Baratheon's charm, but you have something more. You care about the people." Gendry shrugged. "I was one of them. I still feel like I am." She nodded. "Keep that. The moment you forget what it's like to have nothing, you lose your greatest strength." He promised he would remember. The words stayed with him, echoing in his mind as they returned to King's Landing. Each day he tried to hold onto that perspective. King or not, he had lived with an empty stomach and tattered clothes. He never wanted to see the realm's people suffer that way again. Seasons passed. Under Gendry's rule, the Seven Kingdoms found a semblance of unity. Lords who had once warred against each other now sat in council, forging agreements for trade and mutual defense. The roads became safer, the city cleaner. Of course, there were still tensions, local feuds, and the constant simmer of ambition, but they were manageable, contained by a common desire for peace. As Gendry matured into his role, Arya too found a sense of belonging she had long sought. She remained restless, traveling at times, but always returning. She had once believed she was too wild to belong anywhere, but with Gendry, she had found a partner who did not cage her spirit. Their synergy shaped the realm in unexpected ways. Over the years, EY faced each new challenge together, forging a legacy that was equal parts justice and resilience. In time, songs were written about the King of the Forge and the Wolf Queen. Minstrels wove their tales into ballads that spoke of humble beginnings, iron-willed determination, and a love tempered by adversity. The children of the realm grew up hearing these songs, marveling at the idea that a bastard blacksmith and a fierce girl of the North could reshape history. Late one evening, years into Gendry's reign, he stood again on the parapets of the Red Keep, watching the moonlight on the city below. Arya joined him, slipping her hand into his. They looked out at King's Landing, its lights flickering like 1,000 tiny stars. The capital was quieter now, more secure. Guards patrolled the streets, but not with the heavy-handedness of fear that had once reigned. Somewhere below, a child was born, a family broke bread, a couple danced in a tavern. Life went on. Gendry turned to Arya. "It's not perfect," he said softly, "but it's better. People aren't dying the way they used to. There's hope, at least." Arya tilted her head, giving him a wry smile. "We've bought them time. Let's see what they do with it." He nodded, pulling her close. The night was cool, a gentle wind picking up from the sea. In that moment, they were just two weary souls who had fought too many battles, seeking a moment of peace under the stars. "Thank you," he whispered, "for believing in me." She looked up at him, her gray eyes reflecting the moonlight. "I don't believe in many things," she said, her voice low, "but I believe in you." The words warmed him, and he wrapped an arm around her. The city spread before them like a tapestry of their combined effort, frayed at the edges but still holding together. In the silence that followed, they heard the distant call of a night watchman, the rustle of the wind in the banners, the heartbeat of a city that had so long been synonymous with intrigue and bloodshed. But now, under their watch, it breathed a little easier. And so the realm continued under King Gendry Baratheon and Queen Arya Stark. They were not perfect rulers nor miracle workers, but they were a spark of something new in the ancient cycle of power. Their story would be written in dusty tomes, told around hearth fires, debated by lords, and sung by minstrels. And in that story, the people would remember the king who had once been a common blacksmith and the queen who had walked unseen, forging a peace that might, at long last, endure. But their journey was far from over. The throne was a living entity that demanded constant vigilance. Yet each day Gendry rose with calloused hands, ready to shape the realm like metal on an anvil. Each night Arya vanished into the city's shadows, ensuring threats were silenced before they could grow. Together, they preserved the delicate balance between justice and freedom, forging a realm that did not demand submission but asked for unity. And if, one day, they both vanished into legend, the realm would remember them not as conquerors or tyrants, but as two souls who dared to sit upon a throne of swords and still remain true to who they were. For in the end, the greatest power they wielded was not armies or gold, but the simple, enduring truth that the people of Westeros deserved a future free from endless war. A future they shaped day by day, choice by choice, guided by the memories of where they had come from and who they had loved. Such was the reign of Gendry Baratheon and Arya Stark, the King of the Forge and the Wolf Queen, a reign that would echo through the annals of Westeros, lighting the way for those who would come after, forging a path toward something better than what had been before. And in that echo, the realm found a measure of solace at last. Time drifted onward, marked by the steady rise and fall of the sun over King's Landing. Though the city had known little rest in its turbulent history, a calmer rhythm took hold. Gone were the days of sudden massacres in the streets, of scorching dragonfire raining from above. People started to notice that roofs were being repaired, that distant farmland was sprouting new life, that the Red Keep no longer seemed an emblem of terror, but a place where earnest leadership tried to mend what had been broken for too long. Still, beneath this veneer of stability, shadows gathered, for the history of Westeros showed all too clearly that peace, once disrupted, was never truly secure. Gendry kept himself busy from dawn until well after dusk. Much of his time was spent in council chambers, listening to the concerns of various lords and emissaries. He quickly discovered that every victory sparked a fresh challenge. A Riverlands lord would complain that taxes were still too high to sustain the cost of rebuilding, while a trader from Pentos demanded more lenient tariffs to maintain profitable trade. A devout faith militant representative might insist on stricter adherence to certain religious decrees that Gendry deemed too harsh on the small folk. The king tried to weigh each issue with care. He was never a trained politician, but that lack of polish often served him well. He spoke plainly, asked direct questions, and attempted to glean the heart of each problem without the usual pomp or platitudes that characterized previous monarchs. Arya spent much less time in the throne room. She hated the pretense that came with official audiences. She despised the curtsies and flattery, the meaningless courtesies masking sly intentions. So she continued her self-appointed mission in the streets, donning plain clothes, her face half hidden beneath hoods or cloaks, and slipping into the labyrinth of King's Landing. She listened in taverns where the ale was cheap and tongues were loose. She wandered Flea Bottom, where she found that the promised improvements were bearing fruit, but were hardly enough to wipe away centuries of poverty. There, she heard rumors of men who still scorned a bastard king, muttering that the realm needed a pure bloodline. On more than one occasion, she slipped a dagger under the chin of a shadowy agitator, forcing a confession of who was fueling such malcontent. Sometimes it turned out to be an embittered minor lord with old grudges, other times foreign gold financed the rabble. She passed all she learned onto Gendry and his council, leaving it to them to decide the best path forward. If someone needed a more personal lesson, Arya Stark had no qualms about delivering it in the dark of night, though she took care to ensure each strike was precise, never wanton. Their reign attracted attention beyond the Seven Kingdoms. Essos, a land so often seen as a source of sellswords and gold, looked on with a mixture of curiosity and intrigue. Some of the free cities saw in Gendry's new monarchy a chance to open trade routes and fill their coffers. Others wondered if a young, relatively untested king might be vulnerable to manipulation. A small delegation arrived from Braavos with the stated purpose of expanding commerce. Their leader, a tall man with a braided beard, requested an audience, bearing gifts of the finest steel and exotic fabrics. Gendry greeted them courteously. He recalled the swirl of foreign visitors during Robert's rule, though he had only witnessed such occasions from afar. This time, he was the one seated on the Iron Throne, a crown upon his brow that still felt strange on his head. The Braavosi representatives praised the humility of the new king, hinting that a more open Western realm might serve both Braavos and King's Landing well. Gendry listened, asked them to outline possible terms. The conversation stretched late into the evening, with Arya leaning quietly against a pillar at the edge of the throne room, her presence a silent, watchful guard. She'd spent time in Braavos, after all. She knew the city's hidden corners, its dark tides, its deadly assassins. It amused her to see these ambassadors wax poetic about Braavos' glorious heritage while carefully omitting references to the darker aspects of life across the narrow sea. Eventually, Gendry agreed in principle to broaden trade, provided it benefited his people. He insisted that any foreign merchants operating in the Crownlands adhere to fair pricing and pay duties that would be reinvested into local communities. The Braavosi, with guarded smiles, consented, though Arya could see the calculation in their eyes. They did not expect a blacksmith's son to be so forthright in negotiation. The exchange concluded with polite farewells and promises to finalize a treaty soon. When they left, Arya approached Gendry. "Don't trust them too easily," she warned. "They'll pay their duties as long as it suits them." He nodded. "I won't forget. But we need allies, not just to survive but to grow. You know this city was built on commerce as much as war." Arya let out a quiet breath. "I know. Just be careful. Braavos isn't all coin and courtesies." In the following weeks, more travelers and envoys arrived. From Volantis came an envoy requesting permission to establish a minor temple to the Lord of Light in King's Landing, hoping to convert or at least influence the faithful of Westeros. Memories of the old Red Priestess who served Stannis Baratheon came rushing back to Davos and others on the council. Gendry, recalling how Stannis had nearly been undone by fanaticism, agreed only under strict conditions: no forced conversions, no radical preaching in the streets, and no tolerance of human sacrifice or blood magic. The envoy departed with a neutral expression, promising to convey these terms to the high priest in Volantis. Arya privately wondered how many subtle spies might slip in under the guise of worship. In the north, Sansa Stark remained a steadfast ally, but she made it clear she preferred to rule Winterfell and the surrounding lands with a free hand. Many Northerners, though they respected Gendry, had grown accustomed to the idea of Northern independence. "We bend the knee because we choose to, not because we must," they would say. The sentiment reminded Gendry of how precarious his position was as a unifying force in the Seven Kingdoms. There was no absolute guarantee that the old lines of loyalty would hold forever if he displeased the North, the Vale, or even his own Stormlands. He had to tread carefully, forging bonds built on genuine respect rather than fear or blood ties. Amid these alliances and negotiations, Gendry found himself growing into his role in unexpected ways. Each obstacle forced him to learn, to refine his judgment, to temper the idealistic impulses that sometimes clashed with the brutal realities of rule. He often thought back to the forging of a sword, how the steel was heated, hammered, cooled, then hammered again, over and over until it took shape. The monarchy was not so different. His mistakes were hammered out before they could break him, though the cost of those mistakes often affected many. That burden sometimes stole his sleep, leaving him at a desk late at night, penning letters to lords or scanning accounts of the royal treasury to ensure that every golden dragon was used for the realm's benefit. On those nights, Arya would find him hunched over parchment, ink smudging his fingers, a worried line etched between his brows. She would set down a simple meal, perhaps bread and ale, and rest a hand on his shoulder. "You can't fix it all tonight," she would say gently. "There will always be something new. Come away for a bit, clear your head." Sometimes he would relent, letting her tug him to a quieter space, perhaps a hidden corner of the keep or the private courtyard where they practiced sparring. They would cross wooden swords under the moonlight, exchanging playful jibes, each remembering simpler times. Those private moments restored him, reminding him that, despite everything, he was not alone in carrying the weight of the crown. Arya, with her keen eyes and sharper wit, was as vital to the realm as any counselor. It was during one such late-night reprieve that the pair caught wind of a developing situation in the Vale of Arryn. Ravens arrived, bearing news that Lord Yohn Royce had fallen ill. Bedridden, he was unable to govern effectively. The Vale, proud and often insular, found itself in a precarious position. Petty squabbles had broken out among minor lords vying for influence. Some even whispered about severing ties with the Iron Throne, believing that Gendry's regime was too untested to protect them from external threats. Others saw a chance to expand their own power, using the Vale's mountainous defenses as leverage. Gendry decided he could not ignore the Vale's unrest. The Eyrie held strategic importance, and the Vale's history of isolation could quickly spiral into rebellion if left unchecked. Yet he did not want to send soldiers into the mountains, fearing that a show of force might only inflame the region's pride. Instead, he resolved to visit the Vale in person, to speak with the lords and demonstrate that the crown cared for their stability. Arya insisted on joining him. "I'm not letting you walk into that nest of hawks alone," she said, her tone brooking no debate. She had never forgotten that the Vale was her mother's homeland. Catelyn Tully had spent time in the Eyrie when she was wed to Ned Stark, and Arya herself had a fondness for the region's stark cliffs, though she found the Eyrie's high-altitude isolation unnerving. They gathered a moderate escort, fewer soldiers than some might expect, but enough to ensure safety. Ser Davos stayed in King's Landing to handle affairs in their absence, and so Gendry and Arya set off, traveling the winding roads north. The journey took them through farmland that gradually gave way to rocky foothills. When they finally reached the Gates of the Moon, the fortress at the base of the Giant's Lance, they were greeted by a reception of knights in moon and falcon sigils. The sky overhead was gray and churning, as though unsettled by their arrival. Lord Royce's steward, a nervous man named Arstan who seemed ill at ease with authority, met them at the gate. He bowed deeply but fumbled over his words when addressing King Gendry. My lord, your grace, forgive me. Lord Royce awaits your presence, though he is in no condition to stand." He cast anxious glances at Arya, unsure how to address a queen whose reputation lay in whispered stories rather than the usual courtly gossip. They ascended the precarious mountain path in small donkey-drawn baskets, a process that made Arya scowl. "I'd rather climb on foot," she muttered half to herself. Gendry only shook his head with a faint grin. Perhaps it was better than walking an entire day up a sheer slope, but it felt as though a single snapped rope could send them plummeting. He kept his grip tight, mindful of the swirling winds. At the top, the Eyrie rose out of the mist, pale stone walls blending almost seamlessly with the snowy peaks. It was a fortress designed to be unassailable, a place where even dragons might struggle to land safely. Inside, the halls were chill and quiet. They were led to Lord Royce's chambers, where they found the gruff, bearded knight propped against pillows, looking thinner and paler than Gendry remembered. A handful of local lords hovered near the bed, their faces tense. At Gendry's arrival, they stiffened, some dipping their heads in respect, others offering half-hearted bows. Royce beckoned them closer. He tried to speak, but his voice was raspy. "Your Grace," he managed, "welcome. I had hoped to be in better health to greet you properly." "Save your strength, my lord," Gendry said, taking a seat by the bedside. Arya stood behind him, arms folded. "I came to see if the crown can assist. The Vale is vital to the realm, and we can't afford any unrest." "How fare your people?" Royce gave a wheezing chuckle that turned into a cough. "Proud and stubborn as ever. We've lost a good portion of last year's harvest to harsh weather. The minor lords bicker more than usual. Some wish for complete independence. They see your youth as an invitation to test your power." Gendry nodded, keeping his voice steady. "I understand. I won't force them to bend the knee against their will, but I also won't watch the Vale slip into chaos. Tell me what you need." One of the minor lords, a sharp-eyed man named Lord Harlan, spoke up. "We need a strong hand to mediate disputes. Many families have old feuds. Without Royce's leadership, we're in danger of turning on each other." Another lord, slender with long, elegant fingers, smirked. "Or we could stand alone, use our mountainous defenses to keep out the rest of the world. That's been done before. Why should we pay homage to a southern king?" Arya stepped forward. "Because it's not just about paying homage, it's about standing together. The Vale has been part of the realm for centuries, and if you tear away now, you won't find prosperity, just isolation. The crown has no intention of meddling with your traditions, but Gendry is king, and he won't tolerate open rebellion." Her tone was so matter-of-fact that a hush fell. The slender lord sneered, but Royce raised a trembling hand. "Peace," he commanded. "King Gendry has come in good faith. Show him the courtesy he deserves." Gendry cleared his throat. The realm is better united than fractured. We've all seen what happens when each region goes to war. Innocent people die, fields burn, and old grudges deepen. None of us want that. I'm here because I believe the Vale should govern itself in day-to-day matters but remain part of a broader kingdom that looks out for one another. A thoughtful silence stretched. Then another voice, Lady Moralia, a younger noblewoman who had inherited her holdings after her father's death in the last war, spoke up. We need help with the roads that link the Vale to the rest of Westeros. Avalanches and rock slides have made them treacherous. If King Gendry can spare resources to clear the passes, our trade might improve. That I can do, Gendry replied. I'll send engineers from King's Landing and workers from the Crownlands and Stormlands. We'll also provide some funds enough to ensure you can rebuild the roads before next winter. Harlan, the sharp-eyed lord, looked faintly relieved. That's a start. We can hold a local council here to resolve smaller feuds. But we'll need your presence, if only for a short while, to quell talk of independence. Gendry agreed, and so began a tense period of negotiation among the Vale's lords. Each day, they gathered in the grand hall of the Eyrie, Gendry presiding with Arya often at his side. It reminded him of forging metal from scattered scraps. Each scrap of a complaint or old vendetta needed careful handling to be hammered into something workable. Lady Moralia and Lord Harlan emerged as strong voices for unity. Others, like the slender lord who had sneered, continued to argue for a break from the crown, insisting the Vale could stand on its own. That debate took hours, each lord wanting to hear their grievances acknowledged. Gendry listened patiently, though inside he felt the strain. Arya, for her part, studied the nobles with an assassin's eye, noting which ones seemed ready to betray the cause if it served their ambition. Meanwhile, Royce's health declined. He could no longer leave his bed, his breathing shallow. Gendry visited often, seeking the older man's counsel. If this spate of bickering continues, Royce rasped, the Vale will tear itself apart the moment I die. You and I both know that can't happen. Gendry took his hand, struck by how frail Royce had become. We'll sort it out. But do I have your blessing to appoint a regent in your stead if necessary? Royce nodded. Yes, name someone who can command respect. I've done my best, but my time is short. When he slipped into a deep sleep that night, his breathing ragged, Arya found Gendry in the corridor. She studied his pensive face. What's wrong? He's dying, Gendry said softly. He knows it, and so do I. He wants me to choose who will lead the Vale after him. If these lords can't agree among themselves, I worry no matter who I choose, half the region will protest. Arya touched the hilt of needle. Sometimes unity requires a clear command. You can't please everyone. You're king. You make the choice for the good of the realm. He nodded, though it weighed heavily on him. That evening, he sat with a small group of Vale knights whose loyalty to Royce was unquestioned. Together, they weighed candidates. Lady Moralia was popular among the younger generation, admired for her ability to manage her lands efficiently. Lord Harlan was respected for his even-handedness, though some questioned his ambition. Another lord, Bryce Corbray, had the name recognition but was rumored to be short-tempered and arrogant. Then there was a cousin of the Arryn line, Jon Arryn's last known relative, distantly removed, who some lords whispered might keep the Vale's traditions alive. Yet no one quite trusted him to remain loyal to King's Landing. In the end, Gendry settled on Lady Moralia. She was neither the richest nor the most powerful, but her fair-mindedness and willingness to set aside old grudges seemed the best path forward. He consulted Arya, who shrugged. I've watched her in these sessions. She's clever and not easily swayed by nonsense. She'll do. When the morning came, Gendry convened the lords in the Ares Hall. Royce had slipped further, drifting in and out of delirium. The tension in the air was tangible. Some suspected a drastic announcement was coming. Gendry stood at the head of the long table, hands braced on the wooden surface. Arya was a step behind him, alert as ever. I've made my decision, Gendry said, his voice carrying despite the hush. Lord Royce is unable to govern due to his failing health, and he has authorized me to appoint a regent. That regent will be Lady Moralia. A ripple of murmurs broke out. Moralia's eyes widened, though she masked her surprise with a composed nod. Lord Harlan offered a respectful bow, while others glowered or muttered. The slender lord actually pushed back his chair, as if preparing some protest. but Arya's cool gaze pinned him, and he held his tongue. Gendry continued, "This regent will serve until Lord Royce recovers or, if it comes to pass, until the Vale can choose a new leader through proper succession or council vote. We will not have this region descend into chaos. As king, I will not allow the Vale to be torn apart. The crown stands with Lady Morelia, and we will provide assistance for the roads and winter provisions as promised. In return, I expect unity. If any lord here seeks to break the peace, remember that you stand against all 7 kingdoms, not just me." The threat was implicit, but Gendry hoped it was enough to deter rebellion. Lady Morelia stood and gave a measured speech, promising to mediate disputes fairly, to respect the traditions of the Vale, and to maintain loyalty to the Iron Throne so long as it did not infringe on the region's rights. She spoke well, calmly, and by the end of it most of the lords had at least grudgingly accepted her authority. The slender lord offered a stiff bow, perhaps to save face, while Harlan clasped her hand in genuine support. Before leaving the hall, Gendry turned to them all one last time. Lord Royce served the Vale with honor. He believed in the unity of this realm. I ask that you honor his memory by preserving what he fought for. If I hear otherwise, I will return, and not with a small escort." Then he and Arya took their leave, traveling swiftly down the mountain. They paused only to see Royce one last time, though he was barely conscious. Gendry leaned in and quietly told him of the new appointment. Royce's lips twitched in a faint smile, and he murmured a final word of thanks before lapsing back into slumber. They left the area under swirling clouds, uncertain if Royce would live through the week. The tension was not fully resolved, but it was contained like a cauldron set on simmer instead of a blazing fire. Upon returning to King's Landing, Gendry found letters waiting from across the realm. Word of his trip to the Vale had spread, and various lords now had opinions on the new arrangement. He spent hours responding to each, clarifying that his solution was meant to respect local governance while upholding the broader union. Meanwhile, Arya quietly dispatched scouts to ensure no immediate plots against the throne had taken root during their absence. Winter drew closer. Though the worst of the cold was always felt in the north, the entire realm braced for it in some measure. Roads became muddy, seas turned rougher, and the poor in King's Landing struggled to keep warm at night. Gendry ordered more provisions brought in from the Reach, aiming to distribute grain and firewood to those in need. He recalled his own childhood, the biting chill of a damp corner in Flea Bottom. He would not let his people freeze if he could help it. As the nights lengthened, the story of the King of the Forge and the Wolf Queen continued to weave itself into the daily life of Westeros. Minstrels composed new verses about how they had quelled strife in the Vale, how they had negotiated with bravos, how they had granted relief to the smallfolk. Some sang praises honestly, while others did so for the coin it brought them. Nevertheless, the realm listened, and for a time, the name Gendry Baratheon evoked neither fear nor derision, but a cautious hope that perhaps this time, the Iron Throne might not be an iron fist. In the midst of this, Arya was not idle. She noticed a disturbing pattern in whispers around the city, talk of a secret cabal recruiting disaffected soldiers and mercenaries, individuals who nursed grudges from the wars. These men hated all monarchy, believing the realm should be ruled by councils of equals or perhaps not ruled at all. While a philosophical discussion about governance might have been harmless, these particular agitators were rumored to be arming themselves. She spent nights tracing them through twisting alleys, eavesdropping on clandestine meetings. Eventually, she discovered their hideout, a crumbling estate once owned by a minor noble. The ringleader was a grizzled ex-commander who blamed the crown for the death of his family. Arya slipped in through an upper window one moonless night. By the flickering light of a single lantern, she witnessed the group's leader, a broad-shouldered man with a gray-streaked beard, telling his followers that Gendry Baratheon was just another pretender, that the Wolf Queen was a murderer who prowled the streets at night, that the only path to true freedom was an armed uprising. He held up a battered sword as he spoke. Are we to cower while a bastard and a killer rule over us? No. We take the city, rally the smallfolk to our cause, and tear down the throne once and for all. A murmur of approval rippled through the dozen or so men gathered. One of them, a younger soldier with a fresh scar across his cheek, asked how they'd outmaneuver the gold cloaks. The leader claimed he had men inside the city watch, that they would open the gates at the right moment, that unrest could be stirred in Flea Bottom to distract the authorities. Arya, crouched in the rafters, listened to the entire plan. Her heart pounded, though her face remained emotionless. This was no idle drunken talk, it was a genuine conspiracy. Once she had heard enough, she left as silently as she came. She alerted Gendry to the imminent threat. They debated how to respond. The city was large, with countless places for a small group to hide. Gendry considered sending in the gold cloaks for a swift raid, but Arya cautioned him that if the ringleader escaped, he might retaliate in more desperate ways. "We need to cut off the head of the snake in one blow," she said, her eyes narrowed. So they planned. Over the next few days, Arya tracked the movements of the conspirators, noting who they met, where they stashed weapons. She discovered that the rumored infiltration of the city watch was real. 2 watchmen had apparently been bribed to look the other way. Gendry quietly replaced them with men loyal to the crown. Meanwhile, Arya arranged a nighttime confrontation, choosing a spot where the conspirators least expected any interference. When the group convened in the old estate to finalize plans, they found themselves surrounded by a silent cordon of loyal soldiers. Arya herself stepped from the shadows and, before the startled conspirators could draw steel, had her blade at the ringleader's throat. "It's over," she told him, voice low. "Lay down your arms or die." A few men, panicking, tried to fight. They were swiftly subdued. The ringleader made a last lunge at Arya, but she twisted away with lethal grace, leaving him gasping on the floor, a deep cut across his forearm. Soldiers disarmed the rest. Soon they were all in chains, marched through the dark streets to the Red Keep's dungeons. Gendry insisted on hearing their grievances personally. Some he found to be simply misguided, men who had lost too much in wars and saw no alternative. Others were criminals who relished chaos for its own sake. The ringleader refused to speak, glaring at Gendry with hate-filled eyes. In the end, the king sentenced them. The ones who had actively planned violence were to be jailed or, in the worst cases, executed if their crimes were confirmed beyond doubt. Those who had simply been roped into the conspiracy by circumstance or deceit might be conscripted into rebuilding projects under guard, given a chance to redeem themselves through labor. Gendry's approach was more lenient than many expected, but he believed that empty vengeance would solve nothing, especially when some conspirators were driven by genuine despair. The affair rattled the city. People realized how close they had come to a small-scale uprising in the streets. Yet many also saw how swiftly the Wolf Queen and her king quelled the threat. Rumors spread. Some claimed that Arya could vanish into thin air, that Gendry's hammer still hung in his chambers, ready to shatter skulls should another rebellion arise. Whether these stories were exaggerated hardly mattered. The effect was to strengthen the monarchy's image as both watchful and merciful. Winter deepened, draping the city in gray skies. Snow seldom fell in King's Landing, but frigid rain slicked the streets, and the nights grew bitter. Despite the hardships, Gendry's relief efforts helped keep the small folk from starvation. He authorized warm shelters in repurposed warehouses near the docks, offering simple meals of bread and stew. These measures were not enough to eliminate poverty entirely. Decades of neglect could not be undone overnight, but it was a far cry from the days when starving peasants roamed in lawless packs. In the north, Sansa wrote to say that the cold threatened the harvest, but they had stored enough grain for the winter thanks to proactive planning. She also reported that the wildlings beyond the wall were adjusting to their new situation, many settling in abandoned northern villages with Jon Snow's supervision. Gendry found it comforting to know that the North was stable, that the bonds of old friendship with House Stark remained secure. One day, he mused, the realm might truly stand as one, not through force but through mutual respect. As the freezing winds persisted, Gendry began to think more about the future, far beyond the immediate crises. He and Arya had bonded through shared dangers and a genuine, though understated, love. Life at court, however, was changing them. There were still stolen nights when they sparred in the courtyard or teased each other with memories of simpler times. Yet Arya remained restive, and Gendry sensed her longing for open roads and new horizons. When he broached the subject, she gave a small shrug. "I am who I am. Sometimes I need to move, but I'll always come back." He accepted that. He did not want to cage her because Arya Stark was not one to be caged. Yet a quiet question formed in his mind. If she traveled far from him, how would the court respond? Many lords, steeped in tradition, expected a queen to remain by the king's side, presiding over feasts and ceremonies. Arya had no interest in that. Some whispered about heirs, about how a dynasty required children to solidify the line of succession. Gendry winced at the idea of forcing that conversation on Arya. He believed children should come only if and when they both wanted them, not as a duty for the sake of politics. Still, the realm might not be patient forever. The same old cycle that had toppled previous monarchs, where claims to the throne became the flashpoints for war, could emerge again if Gendry failed to secure a clear line of succession. One chilly evening, after a day spent in council, he gently brought up the topic as they stood together on a terrace overlooking the city. Arya's hair blew in the wintry wind, her gaze fixed on the flickering lights in the streets below. "Arya," he began, voice tentative, "the lords and ladies are talking about heirs. They're worried about stability. I'm not pressing you, I just think we need to discuss it." She breathed out, a plume of white escaping her lips. "They've been talking about that since the day you placed that crown on your head. But we can't just conjure an heir out of duty." He nodded. "I know, and I don't want to push you into anything. But if we don't address it, someone else will. They'll spread rumors, they'll plot behind our backs about who's next in line. We've seen how that game destroys the realm." Arya was silent for a long moment. "I'm not opposed to it forever," she admitted at last. "I just hate the idea that it's an obligation. I never wanted to be a lady, let alone a queen forced to breed heirs. But if the realm needs it, maybe someday." Gendry reached for her hand. "I won't force you. If we have a child, I want it to be out of love, not politics. We'll figure it out." She squeezed his hand briefly and turned her gaze back to the city. In that gesture, Gendry saw both her reluctance and her resolve. It would be a delicate matter. For now, they set it aside, hoping that time would grant them clarity. As winter wore on, a new challenge loomed. Dorne, which had briefly flared in rebellion before Gendry's reign was fully established, now faced a power vacuum of its own. The fiery Prince Corran, who once negotiated with Gendry, had died suddenly, some said of poison, others of a fever. Regardless, Dorne was again at a crossroads. Rivals within the desert lands sought to claim leadership, some favoring continued participation in the realm, others demanding strict independence. Whispers reached the Red Keep that border skirmishes were breaking out, with small warbands attacking caravans. Gendry sent a raven to inquire about the situation, asking if he could send a royal emissary to help maintain peace. The reply came back, coolly polite but noncommittal, indicating that Dorne appreciated the gesture yet preferred to handle its own affairs. That response did little to ease concerns. The last thing the realm needed was another Dornish rebellion, especially during the hardships of winter. Yet Gendry knew Dorne's prickly pride, any sign of heavy-handed interference might incite them further. So he chose a different approach, dispatching Ser Davos as a mediator, accompanied by only a small retinue. Davos, with his years of experience and unassuming manner, stood a better chance of being heard. He was tasked with gathering information, offering assistance if welcomed, and assuring the Dornish that King Gendry remained committed to the agreement reached with Corran. Arya wanted to go as well. She loved the heat of Dorne, the stark desert beauty, but Gendry and Davos both insisted that the presence of the Wolf Queen might be seen as too great a show of force. Reluctantly, Arya agreed to remain in King's Landing. While Davos ventured south, Gendry began exploring the idea of forming a realm-wide council of advisors that included representatives from each major region, something more formal than the small council which often skewed toward King's Landing's immediate needs. He envisioned a great council that could convene each year, ensuring that grievances and policies were addressed collectively. The notion was radical for Westeros, where local lords typically guarded their sovereignty. Yet Gendry believed it might help sustain unity over time, reducing the risk of fresh rebellions. Reactions were mixed. Some lauded the idea as progressive and wise, claiming it mirrored the old councils that had occasionally been called in times of succession crises. Others sneered that it would be unworkable, that the lords would never cede any authority to a central body. Even Arya was noncommittal. "Could work," she shrugged, "if the lords don't kill each other first." Still, Gendry pressed forward, drafting letters to each region, asking for their thoughts. He knew it might take years before anything came of it. Part of ruling, he had learned, was planting seeds for a future harvest he might never see himself. The winter gloom weighed on everyone, but a glimmer of hope arose when Ser Davos returned from Dorne. His message was cautiously optimistic. Though divided, the leading Dornish factions seemed more inclined to keep the tenuous peace than wage another war, at least for now. They respected that Gendry had not tried to browbeat them. Instead, the crown's hands-off approach gave them space to resolve their own succession, possibly choosing a new prince or princess who would acknowledge the broader realm but maintain Dornish autonomy. Davos believed an accord might be reached in the coming months. Gendry welcomed the news. One less spark of conflict meant he could focus on long-term prosperity. He turned his attention to the crown's finances, working with the Master of Coin to distribute resources more equitably. He also encouraged trade with the Iron Islands, which were hungry for stable commerce after years of raids and internal strife. Arya found the Ironborn intriguing, fierce, proud, and as restless as she was in her youth. On occasion, she sparred with visiting Ironborn warriors, testing their famed ferocity. Word spread of her skill, and while some men grumbled at losing to a wolf girl, others appreciated her prowess. The realm, for all its simmering tensions, began to feel more connected than it had in years. Caravans carried goods from the Reach to the Westerlands, from the Riverlands to the Vale, from the North down to the Stormlands. Lord Tyrion Lannister, once a key figure in previous regimes, had vanished from public life, though rumors said he lived quietly in the Westerlands, managing a small estate. Gendry had no quarrel with him, but neither did he seek him out. The time of Lannisters controlling the throne seemed past, though the Westerlands still bore that proud lion sigil. Amid these changes, the small folk's sentiment toward the King of the Forge and the Wolf Queen continued to grow more favorable. Street gatherings occasionally cheered them, artisans crafted small figurines of a stag and a wolf side by side, and local shops hung signs featuring stag antlers entwined with a wolf's head in subtle homage. Arya found some of the adoration awkward. "They don't really know us," she'd murmur, but Gendry saw it as a sign that the realm might heal if give. And enough time and leadership that cared. Yet not all were pleased by the monarchy's direction. Quiet pockets of discontent lingered, some pined for the days of Targaryen rule, certain that only a true dragon-blooded monarch could guide Westeros. Others whispered that Gendry was incompetent, lacking the upbringing of a prince. But these voices had less traction now, for the realm had not collapsed nor sunk into chaos. The roads were safer, the harvests more secure, and people found it harder to complain in the face of tangible improvements. Late in the winter, a rumor reached King's Landing that a dragon had been spotted far to the east, flying above the ruins of old Valyria. The claim was unverified, likely just another tall tale, but it stirred old fears and curiosities. Gendry, though intrigued, dismissed the rumor for what it likely was, another traveler's fancy. Arya, on the other hand, felt a flicker of excitement at the possibility of uncharted lands and lost wonders. But neither allowed themselves to be too distracted. If a dragon truly did exist, it was half a world away. Westeros's immediate concerns were enough. As the snows began to melt in the north and the first buds of a hesitant spring appeared in the south, Gendry decided to embark on another royal progress. This time, his goal was twofold: to assess the realm's preparedness for the next harvest and to solidify alliances with local lords who might still waver. He visited the Riverlands again, meeting farmers in newly rebuilt villages. Their gratitude at seeing the fields green once more made all the tireless nights of ledger balancing and negotiation feel worthwhile. Then he moved west, to the edges of the Westerlands, where smaller houses had been overshadowed by the Lannisters for generations. There, he listened to their pleas for more direct trade routes to the coast. He pledged to invest in roads branching out from the gold mines, ensuring that prosperity didn't remain locked in the hands of a few. Throughout these travels, Arya sometimes rode with him, sometimes vanished into the countryside to do her own investigations. She confirmed whether local officials were truly distributing funds for rebuilding or skimming off the top. In one instance, she caught a minor lord quietly funneling crown gold into a private fortress, planning to declare independence once he amassed enough arms. A few well-chosen threats and a single demonstration of her lethal skill convinced him to see reason. By the time Gendry arrived, the lord was pale and trembling, all illusions of rebellion vanished. Their next stop was the Reach, which had recovered substantially thanks to the region's natural fertility and Gendry's careful policies. Here, Arya felt the weight of memory of the War of Dragonfire. She remembered how the Lannister forces had been ambushed by Daenerys Targaryen's dragons once near the Rose Road. The fields were lush again, but the scars of the past lingered in older farmers' stories. Gendry told them he would never allow dragons to reduce their fields to ash again. The farmers, some of whom were old enough to recall Robert's rebellion, took him at his word, seeing in him a Baratheon who did not crave war. Eventually, the pair arrived at Highgarden, that legendary seat of House Tyrell, now ruled by a distant cousin of the Tyrell line, a young woman named Leonette, who had inherited the castle when the main Tyrell branch died out. She welcomed Gendry and Arya with lavish hospitality, offering them the famed wines of the Reach. Highgarden's courtyards brimmed with flowers, a stark contrast to the harsh winter conditions they had left behind in King's Landing. Arya seemed amused by the courtly gentility, preferring to slip away into the rose mazes rather than endure too many polite greetings. Gendry, for his part, was grateful for the respite but remained keenly aware that each exchange was a negotiation of power. Leonette seemed eager to maintain friendly relations with the throne, possibly hoping to regain some measure of the Tyrell's old influence. One evening, as music drifted through Highgarden's halls, Gendry found himself in a small private solar with Leonette and a few of her trusted courtiers. They discussed the upcoming harvest, the distribution of taxes, and the possibility of establishing a new school in the Reach, an institution for the arts and scholarship. Leonette had grand ideas about reviving the cultural legacy of House Tyrell, which once prided itself on refinement. Gendry, intrigued, pledged limited crown support if it could benefit the entire realm by training healers, scholars, and administrators. A place where knowledge flowed more freely might help prevent the kind of ignorance that had fueled old feuds. As the conversation wound down, Leonette offered a gentle smile. "Your Grace, you and Queen Arya have surprised many in Westeros. You've kept the peace longer than most expected. I hope Highgarden can be an integral part of this new era." Gendry nodded. "I hope so too, but we both know peace is fragile. We stand on it like thin ice. One sudden blow from below and we're plunged into cold chaos. Then we must strengthen it from above," Leonette said simply. "Through alliances, trade, culture, even marriage alliances, eventually." He understood the hint. Rumors had circulated that House Tyrell's distant line might someday seek a match to the Baratheon monarchy. But he offered a polite response, making it clear that his union with Arya was a personal choice that transcended typical political bargaining. Leonette gracefully changed the subject, not wanting to press too hard. Meanwhile, in Highgarden's gardens, Arya walked alone through rows of moonlit blooms. She ran her fingertips over the petals of yellow roses, inhaling the scent. In another life, she might have been forced to master these courtly graces, to smile prettily and pretend to enjoy polite conversation. Instead, she had chosen her own path, one that led her from survival to vengeance, from lonely roads to the side of a king who understood her. As she meandered, she spotted a statue of a woman dancing with a rose garland. She paused, recalling the stories of how Marjorie Tyrell once wore flowers in her hair. The world had changed so much since then. She wondered what Marjorie, so skilled at navigating courtly intrigue, would have thought of Arya's approach, ruling by stealth, intimidation, and the occasional quiet mercy. In the days that followed, Gendry and Arya said their farewells to Highgarden. They traveled northward, visiting smaller keeps and talking with farmers in the fields. Their presence, though simpler than in times of old, conveyed a sense of genuine care. They were accessible, often with little fanfare, forging a personal bond with the realm that neither Joffrey nor Cersei had bothered to seek. Everywhere they went, rumors and stories abounded, sometimes outpacing reality. That Arya had killed 100 men in a single night, that Gendry had once hammered out a sword so perfect it could slice through armor like butter. They ignored the hyperbole, grateful that, for the moment, the realm's imagination was kinder than it had been in ages past. Upon returning to King's Landing, they found new letters from Dorne. Davos's efforts had yielded progress. A young Dornish noblewoman named Marisol, rumored to be a distant cousin to the Martell line, was emerging as a unifying figure. She was willing to keep Dorne in the Seven Kingdoms provided her region's autonomy was respected, particularly regarding local laws and traditions. Gendry drafted a reply, expressing his willingness to uphold the earlier agreements, adding that trade and mutual defense would benefit both Dorne and the Crown. So it seemed another spark of conflict was subsiding, at least for the time being. Still, the press of daily governance continued. Gendry assembled his small council, which now included a few fresh faces, men and women of lower birth who had proven themselves capable administrators. This caused some grumbling among the older nobility, but Gendry's approach to choosing talent over lineage slowly gained traction as results spoke for themselves. Corruption was at a notable low compared to previous reigns, though hardly eradicated. Laws were enforced with a steadier hand, and the common folk found less reason to fear the city watch. Flea Bottom still struggled under the weight of poverty, but fewer children starved in the alleys. Amid all these improvements, the question of an heir lingered in the background. Traditionalists at court wanted reassurance that the monarchy would continue without chaos if something befell Gendry or Arya. Some whispered that if the king and queen would not produce a child, perhaps another branch of House Baratheon might be sought out, distant cousins rumored to exist somewhere in the Stormlands. Others speculated about a possible Stark heir, though no official betrothals were in place. Gendry held off on addressing these rumors publicly, not wishing to corner Arya into a decision she wasn't ready for. Yet he sensed the tension building. One brisk morning, as Gendry looked over construction reports for a new harbor expansion, Arya slipped into his study. He glanced up, noticing the unusual intensity in her eyes. She sat down across from him without waiting for an invitation, her hands folded in her lap. I've been thinking, she began, her voice calm, about what happens if you die tomorrow or if I'm gone. We both do risky things. The realm depends on us right now. There's no clear line of succession. I hate it, but we can't ignore it. Gendry set aside his parchment. No, we can't. But we also can't force a child. We're not that kind of rulers. Arya nodded. Agreed. But we can name a temporary successor, someone we both trust to rule if we can. A regent of sorts until we figure out the rest. He considered it. Who do you have in mind? She leaned forward. Ser Davos is wise, but he's getting older. Sansa runs the North well, but she has her own realm to protect. Maybe we formalize the idea of that great council you mentioned, let them choose a successor if the throne falls vacant. Gendry's eyebrows rose. That's bold. It means trusting the realm to make a level-headed decision instead of fracturing. But maybe it's time we trust them. Maybe that's how we break the cycle. A tentative spark of hope lit in Arya's eyes. If we do that, we need to set guidelines. No petty lords can just nominate themselves. We'd need a process, a set of criteria. They talked long into the morning, drafting the framework for a contingency plan. If both king and queen died or were incapacitated, a representative group from each region plus the major houses would convene in King's Landing to choose a new sovereign by majority vote. It was unprecedented in Westeros's history, but so was Gendry's rise from blacksmith to king. In a realm hungry for stability, perhaps the radical notion would find acceptance. Months passed, carrying the realm into a gentle spring. The roads were clearer, commerce flowed, and word of the proposed Great Council succession plan began to spread. Many lords were skeptical, but others saw it as a way to avoid the horrors of another civil war. Diplomacy became the new battlefield. Earnest debates replaced the clashing of swords, at least for the moment. Gendry found that he spent more time writing letters and listening to envoys than he ever imagined. Arya sometimes escaped the city for short rides into the countryside, always returning with sharp observations about local conditions or quietly thwarted threats. Slowly, a new political culture took shape, one that prized collaboration over domination. Dorne recognized Marisol as its new leader, forging an official agreement with Gendry that reaffirmed the terms negotiated under Prince Corran. The Vale found a measure of stability under Lady Moralia, who wrote to confirm that Lord Royce had passed peacefully and that the local lords largely accepted her regency. She even proposed a mutual defense pact with the Riverlands, unthinkable just a few years before. In King's Landing, Gendry continued to invest in public works, better sewers, improved roads, expanded dock facilities that boosted trade. At Arya's suggestion, they set up a network of traveling justices who visited outlying villages, hearing cases that once might have languished. Corruption did not vanish overnight, but each small step whittled away the hold of old habits. From the shadows, Arya stalked any who tried to prey on the vulnerable, her presence a silent deterrent. Amid all these tasks, Gendry and Arya sometimes found quiet moments. Late-night walks along the battlements, cups of wine shared by a hearth, laughter recalling the days when they were two youngsters on the road, uncertain of the future. Their love had an unspoken depth, two souls who never expected to rule, yet who had taken on the burden for the sake of a realm they refused to abandon. One day, on a private ride outside the city, Arya pulled up her horse along a grassy bluff overlooking the Blackwater rush. She dismounted, gazing at the winding river below. Gendry followed suit. The sun was bright, the air warm with the promise of early summer. "What do you see out there?" she asked, her voice gentle. Gendry squinted at the rolling fields and the distant outline of King's Landing. "I see a realm trying to heal. I see a city that's been battered by war, finally breathing easier." Arya nodded. "I see roads we've traveled, roads we'll travel again. Sometimes I want to just ride off, see what's beyond the horizon. But I remember I have a duty here." He turned to her. "That's why this works, you know. You keep me from losing myself in the throne. And I remind you that there's more to life than just wandering." She reached out, took his hand. "Sometimes I think you're right. Sometimes I think we found a balance. And sometimes I'm still scared it'll all crumble if we turn our backs for a moment." Gendry squeezed her hand. "It might, but we'll face that if it comes." They stood there, letting the wind rustle their hair. Two figures on a bluff, holding the fate of a realm in their entwined hands. In that moment, everything felt strangely simple. No courtly intrigue, no grand speeches, just two people who cared deeply about each other and the lands they oversaw. As they remounted and headed back, they passed a small caravan of farmers transporting produce to King's Landing. The farmers recognized their king and queen, bowing respectfully. One older man called out, "Thank you, your graces, for keeping us safe. May the Seven bless you." Arya gave the faintest nod, unaccustomed to praise, while Gendry offered a kind word of thanks. Such spontaneous gratitude reminded them why they continued this arduous path. Upon returning, Gendry hosted a gathering of the small council and a handful of invited lords to discuss the Great Council's succession plan more thoroughly. The conversation was lengthy, filled with concerns about who would be represented, how votes would be counted, and whether certain large houses could dominate the process. In the end, they agreed to a framework. Each major region would send an equal number of representatives, each smaller region a designated few, and seats would be reserved for impartial advisors like Ser Davos. It wasn't perfect, and many details remained unresolved, but it was the first tangible blueprint to prevent another bloody scramble for the throne. As the weeks blended into months, the notion of a realm guided by fairness and collaboration slowly took firmer root. The changes were incremental, with each region maintaining its character. The North still felt the cold and kept to its traditions. The Vale was perched in its lofty isolation, run by Lady Moralia. The Iron Islands continued to fish and sail, forging a new identity less reliant on raiding. The Westerlands mined gold but had to share it in trade rather than hoard it under tyrants. The Reach blossomed as a cultural center, with the new school in Highgarden drawing promising minds. The Stormlands, Gendry's ancestral seat, took pride in the king they had unknowingly fostered. King's Landing bustled with commerce, forging a renewed sense of unity out of the chaos of its past. Dorne, under Marisol, guarded its independence while acknowledging that working with the crown served its interests well enough for now. For Arya, the open question remained, how long would this hold? She refused to become complacent. From time to time, she still donned a hooded cloak and slipped through the city, verifying that criminal elements hadn't established new footholds. She ventured beyond the city walls as well, making sure the watchtowers and garrisons were alert. Gendry continued to rely on her sharp instincts to quell danger before it blossomed into full-fledged revolt. And in moments of reflection, Gendry sometimes marveled at how far they had come. He was still the blacksmith's son at heart. He remembered the clang of the hammer, the heat of the forge, the sweaty exhaustion after a day of honest labor. Now he labored in different ways, through words, laws, trust-building. Perhaps that was why he never succumbed to the arrogance that devoured so many rulers. He knew that power was fleeting, that a king's might was only as strong as the people who believed in him. Their life together was unconventional, shaped by compromise and fueled by the unrelenting demands of the realm. They had no illusions of an idyllic rule. They knew every day could bring fresh crises, new betrayals, or lingering feuds. But they faced it all side by side, each complementing the other's strengths and covering the other's weaknesses. Arya was the swift blade in the dark, the vigilant hawk. Gendry was the steady hand, the forged shield, unwavering in his sense of justice. And so the seasons turned again. Summer approached, warm winds blowing over fields of grain that once had been scorched. The realm was not free of trouble, far from it. But it was free of the immediate terrors that had once reduced it to ashes. In the minds of the common folk, Gendry Baratheon, the King of the Forge, and Arya Stark, the Wolf Queen, had ushered in a tenuous era of restoration. The roads were safer, the harvests more reliable, the local courts more just. Of course, to rule was to face an endless series of tests. But each time they passed one, they gained a little more faith in themselves and in the people they served. The old stories of unending bloodshed began to recede, replaced by the possibility that peace, while fragile, might endure if guided by hands both strong and kind. One late afternoon, in a final scene that summed up the tapestry of their shared reign thus far, Gendry and Arya walked through the lower wards of the Red Keep, checking on repairs to an ancient tower that had partially collapsed years before. Dust motes danced in beams of sunlight filtering through tall, narrow windows. The castle no longer felt like a forbidding labyrinth of secrets but a living monument under their care. Pausing by a window, Arya gazed out at the city's sprawling rooftops and the glimmering water of Blackwater Bay beyond. "Look at it," she said quietly. "So many stories, so many lives." Gendry came to stand beside her, his arm brushing hers. "All depending on us to not fail them," he said softly. Arya gave him a sidelong look, a faint smirk on her lips. "We won't fail them. We might stumble, but we'll keep going. Because that's who we are." He placed a warm hand on her shoulder. "Yes, that's who we are." And thus they stood together, two figures bound by destiny's hammer and shaped by the fires of war, looking out over Ar. Eom that was no longer locked in the vicious cycles of the past. Their story continued, day by day, choice by choice, forging a legacy that future generations might call golden, or at least mercifully less red with the blood of civil strife. In the annals of Westeros, Gendry Baratheon and Arya Stark would be remembered as leaders who refused to bend to the cruelty of history. who instead molded fate as if it were steel upon an anvil, forging it into a future that, while never certain, shimmered with the hard-won promise of hope.